Well, really wanted to thank you again for hopping on this show and, taking some time out of your Saturday to record the podcast. The first question I wanted to ask you is, what was growing up in Santa Ana like for you?
You know what? Thanks, Noah, for having me on, and thanks for having this platform for us to talk about, important issues and, just people in the community. It was really different because Santana in the early 60s when my family arrived, we arrived in right around, 65. The demographics were really different, right? So we were probably the only Spanish-speaking family in our neighborhood when we first got here. So a lot of folks were, it was kind of a retirement community back then. It was a much smaller city, a lot of orange groves. We didn't see the Latino influence. We didn't really see an immigrant influence. I mean, we had neighbors who were German, who were Irish, who were, just very, very sort of a monolithic Anglo, neighborhood. And then I think that was right at the beginning of, sort of the white flight to the suburbs in South County and other areas. And then it was followed by obviously the early 70s, mid 70s, this wave of immigration to Santana, and Santana became a port of entry for many people. And, for me, I was born in La Paz, Bolivia. So our journey was a little bit further, even though there's a lot of Latinos in Santana now. The majority of them are from Mexico. And, for us, it was even that dynamic within the Latino community being Bolivian and non-Mexicano, but, the language and, the food and the culture kind of brought everybody together. But yeah, really different city than what we have today.
Okay. Did you ever get to visit your country, Bolivia, as an adult?
Yeah, I've gone back a few times because it's a 14-hour plane ride. So it's a real hike. And it's also the highest city in the world, right? So La Paz is 2 miles above sea level. And yeah, man, it's like going, to go to the Himalayas, right? But there's an actual city up there. So we haven't been able to go back as often as we would have liked because it was just, cost prohibitive, really expensive. And then it really is, for those of us who are like, flatlanders, going 2 miles above sea level is harsh. So I took my family back with me a couple of years ago for the first time. And yeah, they loved it just because, their mom is from Zacatecas, Mexico. We had gone back there quite a few times because it's just easy, right? It's an easy plane ride. It's a trip, but going on this trek was different. But they dug it because I think, for them, I think they don't have the experience that maybe I had as a first generation, where, we came, even though I was really young, we still had a lot of the culture, a lot of the history, and just a lot of the customs that we brought back with music and food. And our house was like, sort of the halfway house for Bolivians coming to, the United States, because, just like any immigrant, I think, experience, you have, probably like a family member who arrives in one place and then other family members start arriving and that's their place to at least crash for the first, few months until they get themselves settled, find a job, find their own place. And back then, it was, there was plenty of work and plenty of opportunities. Things weren't as, hostile maybe back then, but there weren't that many Latino families. So, there was no Latino businesses. We probably, I would say, the demographics are completely inverse to what they are now, where the city's 80% Latino, 10% Anglo, 10% Asian. It was probably 80% Anglo back then, right? And maybe 10 or 15% Latino at most. You still had old neighborhoods like Logan and Delhi, and which are the oldest neighborhoods in town. You had some braceros there, but they were really confined to just those neighborhoods, right? And there weren't really many Latino families sort of in the what they would call sort of central city neighborhoods.
Okay. Well, since there was a higher population of Anglos also in the 60s too, when, race relations was relatively high, did you and your family kind of feel any discriminatory or prejudice against you guys when you guys were growing up?
Yeah, man. I think, I think we felt kind of fearful, and that, just not being certain of like, hey, how people are going to treat you, whether you're going to be received well. I think, we obviously couldn't speak Spanish. And so the first thing that, our parents tried to teach us is, hey, forget about the Spanish, learn English as quickly as you can, and abandon,
Yeah.
Spanish. And that was the, sort of the negative part. And I think it's, I think our parents love for us to protect us, but at the same time, you start thinking, well, is there something wrong with my culture? Is there something wrong with me speaking Spanish? You go through these sort of, crisis moments of identity and, just, feeling inferior. Right. And so I think that was difficult. I don't know if there was like overt racism, because there were some decent families, right, that we had near us that really did help us through and, helped, my mom find a job and, helped take care of us when, they were working, because, they were working, double shifts. And so we were home a lot by ourselves. But so there was decency, I don't think there was that, again, hostility. I think the hostility now is, it's probably worse than it was back then, at least in Santa Ana, because, they just, we're such a small minority. And I think now, being a much larger group, people feel maybe, intimidated by that, we are here to impose, changes. But really, I mean, if you look at East Coast cities, the same thing that happened to them with the influence from the German and the Irish and the Italian, I mean, it's the same thing that happens here, right? The influence from Mexico being so close to the border, you have to have those changes. But, and we didn't see that. And that's something, I see now, is that people just don't want Santa Ana to kind of celebrate who we are now, right? Yeah. And that's what's tough, is that, we're trying to be like, Mission Viejo, we're trying to be like Lake Forest. Look, we're just never going to be that, ever. And so why not celebrate, all these things that have happened in the 60s and the 70s, and then in the 70s, you remember the refugees from Vietnam came. And so Little Saigon started in Santa Ana. I mean, it was, literally there's an intersection on First and Sullivan where there's still a Vietnamese restaurant, but all the refugees came here. So this was really the birthplace of Little Saigon. And then eventually they started moving west into Westminster, Garden Grove, some of the other cities. But, the cool thing about Santa Ana, I think, is that, we really need, and we should, embrace that diverse, the diverse communities that we have here.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed as I've gotten older and just gotten to see and meet more people from different places, especially colleges. I think that's a great route to do that. Growing up in Santa Ana, just most parts of Orange County, at least central Orange County, it's so diverse that I never I took it for granted, I guess, when you meet people that are from different parts of Nevada, Utah, and you meet just people in college from all places of the world and the country, and they're not used to being Vietnamese food and Mexican food and El Salvadorian food and, Chinese food and Japanese food, all within 2-mile radius of where we live here in central Orange County. I just, I didn't realize it was such a great opportunity to obviously learn about different cultures and whatnot. But it's, we're very fortunate to live in this kind of area.
Yeah. And I think to your point, I know the first time I went away and, I went to school up in the Bay Area, and that's where I met my wife. And she's from East LA, right? So we both, kind of met, and we had a really similar experience, because Santa Ana, in many ways, is very similar to, East LA, Boyle Heights, Lincoln Heights, because what we would always say is our parents wouldn't have to, there is no need to speak English, right? Because you could go to, mercados, you could go to different places, and, there's somebody there that's going to speak to you in Spanish. Once you go sort of out of these, spaces, you realize, wow, we live kind of in a very unique area, right? Where I think our culture is so embedded now. It's taken generation and it's taken decades, right? But I know my mother-in-law didn't speak a word of English, right? And she lived, right in East Los, and, had her, small business, and had, her, her place and her neighbors, and she'd go everywhere. I mean, she was just, very at home. And she didn't have to speak the language. So I think that is something that when you leave here, you realize, the country's so large. If you go back east, my son right now is, is in Boston. He's in his second year in college. And so, you realize that the South, the Midwest, I mean, really, really different experiences.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I think, we have a unique space here, man. It is, Santa Ana is definitely, a place of its own.
You mentioned UC Berkeley, or I know you graduated from UC Berkeley from a bachelor's, but before you got into college, how were you as a student through grade school and high school?
You know, I wasn't really an outstanding student, or somebody who stood out. Um, I went to John Muir, the old John Muir, the original John Muir
Oh,
that was
wow.
on brand, yeah. And then I'm going to date myself, man. Uh, Back in '71, when we were in grade school, there was a big earthquake, right? A huge
Mhm.
earthquake. It severed the building in half, and so they bussed us over to Sierra. Yeah, and Sierra Intermediate used to be Sierra Elementary, so they bussed a lot of us over to Sierra. And then I went to Willard, and then I went to Foothill for high school. But look, for me, I just wasn't somebody who took advantage of the opportunity that was available to me as much as I could have. Right? I mean, I was never, failing, but I was just kind of gliding through. And I think a lot of it has to do with what I was telling you. You do feel kind of inferior a little bit. You do feel like, hey, man, my future is not going to be bright. I'm just going to get through this and move along. And then, I think when, my experience going to college, because I didn't start out at Cal, I started out at Cal State Fullerton. And
Mhm.
so I went there and I realized immediately I was totally unprepared, right? I mean, not just for the academic change, but really culturally. And I ended up what they used to call invited to leave, which is a nice word to say you're expelled. So, but I think it's because a lot of us didn't take advantage of things like how do you learn how to study, right? How do you manage time? How do you take notes? Just basic nuts and bolts of being able to do well in college, and they expect you to do well once you walk in.
Mhm.
And so that took me a little while, and so but that experience was a really important learning moment because I met some really good people there that just other Latino students, like you said. Not really from Santana, but just from different places that, we were sort of our support network, right? And we helped each other out. People would teach you how to take notes, how to study, how to review. And those were really critical moments for me. And that's when I, learned to love to learn, right? I mean, just embrace that and realize, hey, this is an opportunity that if I don't take advantage of, it's on you forever, right?
Mhm.
And you're there. And I remember this, it was a trip. So this counselor back then, we used to have affirmative action, right?
Mhm.
And no longer have it, but it was called the Educational Opportunity Program. And there was this lady there. Her name was Stephanie Ortiz. She was a former nun, and
Mhm.
so she sat me down because I had to appeal to get back in. And she told me, she goes, man, she goes, I'm going to let you in, but let you back in. She goes, but you need to understand, you are taking the space of somebody else who's more deserving than you, and you always need to understand that. So, I mean, she laid it down hard, right? So she just said, look, you are either going to do something with this opportunity, and if you don't, you realize you're doing it at the expense of somebody else who could be here who may do more with it. But it was it was one of those moments when somebody just makes you realize in a sentence like what you're doing and what this means. And so I was never able to go back and thank her because she passed away soon after that. But she was cool people because I think she made me understand how valuable that moment and that opportunity was. And from then on, look, I really took her words to heart. People that I met in college, helped me study, and was on the dean's list for the next 4 semesters, and was
Wow.
was was called by Berkeley to apply there, and so I applied. Went on and received my degree in economics there, and then went on to law school at UCLA. But I think it's moments like that from people that care, and maybe it was a harsh truth that you needed to hear. And sometimes you can't be compassionate; you have to be real, and you
Yeah.
just have to say, look, you have to do this because this isn't about just you. This is about people who could be here in your place, and you're not taking advantage of it.
Mhm. Wow.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty incredible story. If you can recall, what were some of the studying strategies that you learned that kind of helped you take that next leap and get you on the dean's list?
I would say, man, is they had remedial classes back then because affirmative action was an academic policy still. They had classes that would, teach students who were underperforming how to study, like really basic stuff, things that you should know going into college, but yet they allocated resources for that. So it was just, like I said, just basic things like how do you, how do you prepare for a test? How do you note take? How do you, how do you do, just cards and flashcards and just stuff that's like basic, right? Because back then we didn't have computers, we didn't have the internet. So it was like, man, it was, brick and mortar. It was, hardcore books and stuff. But I think that coupled with like, the students that I met there who were like a community, and that community embraced me and, and I embraced them. And we like, we would stay up, we would pull all-nighters. We, all of us would bring food and we'd, study together, and we just became tight and close. And I think that's what really got me through. And that's what made me realize, this is, education, this opportunity is like, totally critical. Right. And, but it was just those basic things that I think I ended up, just embracing. And now those formed sort of my value system now, because I think that as I move through, I realize that a lot of our, students in Santa Ana aren't getting that same background maybe that I was deficient in, and so how do we do that? How do we, provide those experiences like for me, I used to play basketball. So I played basketball at Cabrillo Park. There were programs there, we'd go there and shoot around, and, that at least kept me from getting into serious trouble, right? Still got into some trouble, just not serious trouble. But, when you have programs like that, we go swimming at, Memorial Park, it was where I, where you kind of learned how to swim and, and you just learned how to, be in the water. But those programs and just hanging out, at the boys club, I remember, and just playing ping pong, with friends. Those experiences, I think, that were safe spaces, that were, important for us to have. I see a lot of that just being not as available and not as plentiful, right? Because it was a small city back then. I mean, we definitely weren't like 300,000. Now we're, upwards of 350,000 and probably more, just because we're not counted properly. Our community is really difficult to count. So that, I know that's an underestimate of who, how large we are. But yeah, it's, I'm hoping that some of those things that helped me get through back then, we can sort of reinstill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting too, because you mentioned the whole ping pong thing, and that's something that both my parents, they're from your generation as well. And growing up in Santa Ana, they always have stories of like ping pong tournaments at Delhi Center or whatever park. And I'm just like, man, why did they have that when I was growing up? And it just, I did grow up to learn and how to swim and do some of more of the advanced swim techniques at Memorial Pool. So that was, kind of, I can relate with you on that. But it definitely felt like a lot of those programs that my parents and uncles all got to talk about, whether it was like 3-on-3 tournaments at the park or, just stuff that the city was putting on for the youth and teenagers or young adults. They don't have those things anymore, or I don't hear about them, or they're not advertised properly. And I just never got to experience. I still had my own experiences, but I didn't have those experiences that they tell me about.
Yeah, they're not as, I think maybe because it was a smaller population, maybe you could serve it better. But I think that's one. But the other one is that there was a moment where Santa Ana started shifting its resources away from investing in its people and in its youth and saying, we really just need all this money to go into public safety. And that's the only way we're going to keep the city safe and healthy. And, now I think everybody's starting to rethink that. I think that, there's a moment right now, and hopefully it turns into a movement and an effort to say we have to reevaluate some of the priorities and some of the things that we're funding, because we all want a safe society. We all want a safe community. Nobody wants to live in a dangerous condition, but there's ways you can achieve that safety without just simply policing, right? That's the easy thing to do. That's the easy option to say, let's just, hire more, more officers, and let's just throw money at the problem. By throwing money at the problem, you're not really getting to the underlying cause. You're just feeding the symptom, right? And to the extent that I think, Santa Ana was, a safer place maybe back when there was really, a full effort to try to provide just, options, and I remember even, doing summer programs through the county, right? Going and working, and you had, you'd be able to make some money and you'd be able to learn something. And then there were, internships at City Hall and, different departments. So I think a lot of those resources ended up shifting away, and, now we have, public safety, which is vital. I mean, nobody's saying, hey, let's dismantle or let's, get rid of it, but it's now a disproportionate amount that it takes from, our unrestricted general fund, which are monies that, all of us pay into for taxes. And now it's like upwards of like 60%. So that's when you realize a community's value system and what they prioritize, right? And I think for us, it almost sends a message like, hey, we have to be policed. And that's not a good message either, because then we think we are living in a, in sort of a criminal environment. And I don't think that's true. I think, for Santa Ana, we have our crime element, right? A criminal element, but it's not vast. It's not widespread. I think for us, we're a pretty law-abiding community because we have so many undocumented residents that live in Santa Ana. They're just fearful to go out. I mean, and they're living under real just, fear of being caught, deported, repatriated, and separated from their families. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think we have this like violent, a society. I think we have our issues, but we just need to address those sort of root causes better, more intelligent.
Mm-hmm. And like how I like to describe policing to friends, or like when I have that kind of conversation, is like, let's say you're a pitcher, you play a sport and your shoulder's bugging you, and it's, there's a lot of pain that you're having with it. You take painkillers to get rid of the pain for momentarily, and obviously like you can still play your sport and still do kind of well. But, let's say it's a deeper rooted problem and you need to get surgery on it, or you need to rehab it, or you need to do certain exercises and stretches to kind of help recover from that. And I feel like that's like where we're starting to reach out to as a society. And I know the defund the police thing kind of gets misconstrued by one side or the other. Like some people think it's way extreme this way. Some people think it's really bad that way. And I get it, but I understand that like policing and putting a bunch of more money into that is just kind of like taking more painkillers for a problem that may need surgery for. And it's like, hey, we need to do more of these things, like invest into the youth or have these different internship programs so that kids aren't growing up to be adults that are fearful of police, because that shouldn't be the way it is either,
Yeah, no, you're right. And look, for me, it's kind of personal because I know that, I had a brother-in-law who was a deputy sheriff in LA County. And so he was shot and killed, as a really young man, he's 33 years old. And look, so it's personal. I get how difficult and how dangerous the job is. But again, even when he was alive, we'd have these conversations that, you just have to, you have to reevaluate how you're investing in safety and, in law enforcement. And I think having, a youth and having youth, doing things that are, positive and constructive, goes a long way in doing that, because like you said, the mistrust that some youth have in law enforcement almost leads you down a certain path, right? Versus having trust and confidence and a good relationship with and a healthy, relationship with law enforcement. Look, it's a different thing, but, he would say, some people in law enforcement really shouldn't have that much authority and shouldn't be, wielding weapons, right? Because they're given awesome authority, and many of them, are former military, they're maybe have some underlying PTSD issues. But I think, law enforcement hasn't done the best job in vetting some of those folks. And, I think in Santa Ana, we're with our law enforcement and our police department, it's been, the really good thing about it is that I know there was a real huge effort, a few years back to make sure to hire bilingual officers, because I think when you have people that can speak to you in your, in your language, and we have so many monolingual Spanish speakers, it goes a long way. The other thing was there was an effort to hire a lot of people who grew up in Santa Ana. So those two things are really good things, right? And I think they go a long way. I think we're missing a few steps where we need to realize if we can maybe build that or create that bridge between, law enforcement and the community, and try to break down that lack of trust that we have, and really speak to one another and say, okay, what is our goal? We want a healthy We want a healthy society. We want a healthy environment. We want a safe environment. All of us want that.
Yeah.
Folks that are saying, let's reevaluate, are not saying we want chaos. We want, danger. We want, criminality. None of us, I think, at least that's not the point of view that I'm coming from. I just figure we need to do it in a different way, because what we've been doing hasn't been working and yielding the results that we need.
Right. And it's tough as the city grows. It's hard to have those connections between the police officers and the community. But that's one thing that I feel like smaller communities and smaller cities and smaller towns have better of, right? If there's fewer people and those few officers, chances are they grew up in those towns. They knew the people they went to high school with. And it's a lot different if you are, talking, you pull over your, high school teammates from whatever sport you played, their son or their daughter, and you pull them over late at night. And you have just a kind of different perspective. It's like, oh yeah, I played with you so-and-so in high school. And, you have that kind of connection. Obviously, as the city grows, it's a little tougher to do that. But I remember even in elementary school going to Greenville Fundamental, they had the whole DARE program, right? But they only came to talk to us once, and it was a one-time thing. They talked to us about the drugs and whatever else they talked about. But it just seemed like, okay, like that was kind of like a minimal effort thing. And I don't recall too much of it because it was only a one-time thing as we were, I think, in 5th grade going on to middle school. So it would have been nice to have consistency from kindergarten, just little presentations here and there, or career day. They kind of hop in and talk about what they do, kind of incorporate more things like that,
Yeah, no, I think, that's huge, right? I mean, that then you grow up with a different perspective, right? And when you're a kid, you're so, you're so impressionable at that age, right? And you can either see something as negative or see something as positive. But if you've grown up seeing like, hey, this positive exchange, your parents, being treated well with dignity and, with respect, I think those things are instilled in a kid's mind. And you have that, as opposed to having to have the talk, right?
Right.
Like I do with my, 2 boys, because they're not boys. I guess one's 21, one's 18, but they're still boys to me. They always will be. But they're big kids. One's 6 foot, the other one is close to him. Big kids, relatively speaking, but they're the most gentle kids you'll ever find, right? Mm-hmm. But I know that in the wrong situation or in the wrong exchange, they could be in harm's way. So they're very Latino looking. And maybe when they have their hoodie on, they're very ominous looking, to somebody who doesn't know them. And that's the fear that, I have as a father. And, now as a, somebody who represents many, young kids here in the city, I fear that exchange, right? That they may be misunderstood, and some exchange could go wrong and things could be horrible, right? So as a father of color, with young boys of color that are very big, and you just have to have that talk, which is really a difficult one to have. And you feel like when you're having it, it's like, why am I having this conversation? Why isn't, why is this? Why do I have to have this exchange with my son? When you should be talking about good things. Hey, when you go out, be respectful of, who you are. But now you're talking about life and death, right? You're talking about, what you should do with your hands, how you should, behave. And that's unfortunate. That's a really painful conversation to have with, somebody you love. But you see it. And if you don't have it, then you're not equipping, that person that you love with the right response and with the right mentality. But I just felt like, I have to lay this on my son, and that's a tough thing for a young person to have to absorb at that age, and it's part of where we are right now. And I think that's what we're trying to resolve, is that we have less of those moments, and less of that need to have that conversation, because we know that, when you're not a person of color, that's not a conversation you have, it's just not necessary.
Right. And I think one thing that will counteract that too is us as a Latino community, also the Black community, Asian community, and as well the Polynesian community. Any person of color, I feel like we got to stop when we're younger, stop like making fun of people or kind of teasing people who do want to pursue careers in law enforcement, right? Whatever field they want to make it into. But I remember as friends, like, oh, you want to, if so-and-so said they wanted to be a cop, they're like, oh, they'll say a lot of demeaning things to them. And I think that's very common in the Black and brown communities and the Polynesian communities. And so we don't get representation and good people, let's say, or better people in those positions of power to patrol the streets and patrol the city. And instead we're letting other people, whether it's outsiders from out of town or people who don't know the area and that kind of stuff. But I think, obviously it's a step-by-step process, but I think that's one thing that I think will help churn the tide as far as views if we have more of our people, more brown people, more black people, more Polynesians, Asians, and serving in law enforcement.
Yeah, 100%, man, 100%, because there is, you bring your experiences to your job, whatever you do, yeah. Right? So if you don't have an experience in our community or you don't have that background, it's a foreign element that you're introducing into a very different environment, right? So I think to the extent that you have more people that can at least relate, hey, when they go into a social setting where maybe there's a party, there's a gathering, if a person knows that they've been in that environment before in Santa Ana, hey, there's banda music and yeah, it's loud, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing dangerous about it. They're cooking, birria, or they're, doing something else. So you can relate to that. But I think for somebody who maybe grew up in the South, has never seen this, and then they walk in, wow, there's a lot of people in hats here, big belts. I'm kind of scared, I'm kind of intimidated. So, I think those things, don't help. And, and I think, kind of just talking about, sort of dangerous environments. I mean, for me, what's been sort of my policy effort, big policy push on the council has been, the overcrowding in Santa Ana, which we didn't see. And, that leads to other dangerous conditions. I mean, huge public health conditions, right? Problems that we're seeing with this pandemic, but also, just dangerous conditions where you have a lot of people living in a very small area, right? And you have like 2 and 3 families to a unit. Those things, when an officer comes in or when, you could really, those overcrowded conditions permeate everything, just a kid's lack of ability to be able to focus when they're on a, Zoom, classroom, or distance learning. They have, 10 people behind them. There's not a quiet space. You're competing for the, for the signal. Those overcrowded conditions, just make it really, really tough for us to be able to thrive, as a city. So we have to do something. I don't think that we can just sit idly by. And, I always thought that, creating more affordable housing where you don't have 2 and 3 families to a unit, if you can make it affordable for 1 family per unit to live in, it alleviates like a lot of issues that people complain about, like parking. Everybody hates parking in Santa Ana, right? Yeah. Like, none of us like it, right? Where people are putting the garbage cans, where, save more space. And then, well, that wouldn't happen if you didn't have this problem with high rent and having to have 3 families living in 1 space versus 1 family. Because those 3 families each have people who drive, and then they're going to bring their cars. And so we weren't built for that sort of density. The city wasn't designed that way. And so we're really forcing that, making it tough. But yeah, it makes it unlivable sometimes. It makes it really difficult, right?
Right. And so like my grandparents live in the Delhi neighborhood, and there's a lot of younger families on that street that they live in, but a lot of those families had kids my age, and a lot of them can't move out. So they, get their own cars, and now there's 4 or 5 cars in the driveway, 1 on the lawn, a few on the sidewalk, just because, they have a bunch of kids, and it's too expensive to really move out on your own unless you have a really good paying job, or, you're willing to do kind of what you're doing with your parents with, friends or, colleagues or work coworkers or whatever. So it's, you're going from one clustered environment to another. And when you said the trash can thing, that's so true. Like over the years, like Delhi has gotten really bad as far as like, just putting your trash cans out to save your, spot for your parking. Cause it's so hard to find parking nowadays there.
Yeah. Look, I've seen people get into like, shouting matches. Hey, this is my space. And, I think again, that's another symptom of a different underlying problem. Like you said, more kids you can't move out because why? Rents are so high. They're not going to be able to do maybe what I did back when, I was maybe 18 when I went off, well, maybe not 18, but 20, went off and I was able to find an apartment, share it with roommates, but it was still affordable. And this was, years back, but now it's gotten so bad where, even a family alone can't make the rent. Because, I think a really alarming statistic was one that I just found, that over 80% of our residents in Santa Ana earn less than $53,000 a year. And there's some neighborhoods that have their they measure it by this one thing called AMI, your average median income. Some families in neighborhoods like Lacey and others earn less than $20,000 a year. So that's just crazy, right? I mean, because that's not even gonna, pay for your maybe your rent for 6 months, right? If you do something. And so I think that those statistics show that Santa Ana is unique from all the other 33 cities in the county. And we need to have our public policy and, guide who we have in our city, not who we want to be, but who we're supposed to be representing, right? And we have this demographic that is very challenged, that is, rent poor. And we need to make sure that our public policy is aligned to represent them and provide them with opportunities, because, look, I'd love not to have the problem, but the problem is here. And what do? Do you ignore it and just, let this continue? But you can't. And there's different public policies that you can make to at least try to prevent rents from being so high and not displacing folks. Because what happens is when the rents are so high, people leave the city. They move to other areas. They'll go to San Bernardino became the 9th largest city, and kind of leapfrogged Anaheim and Santa Ana, not because everybody wants to live in San Bernardino. They just couldn't afford it here. So it was the flight to the, Inland Empire, because those rents were more accessible. And they became like one of the largest cities within, 5 years. And it was all, I think, well, not all, but it was primarily because people were just priced out of this market.
And that's one thing too, I watched as my parents grew up and grew older, a lot of their family friends or families or relatives or other friends of theirs too, they started moving to the Riverside and IE and Upland and Rancho Cucamonga. And I've noticed too, as I've worked different jobs throughout my life, I'll be working in I worked at a Costco in Tustin, and there's people coming all the way from like Lake Elsinore and way out there. And I'm just like, wow, like you guys are willing to sit like an hour and a half of traffic just for cheaper way of living, but also just to work in Orange County. And I think they still want to send their kids to Orange County. So it's a very desirable place to live in this area, but it's very expensive too. So it forces a lot of people out.
Yeah. Cause most people would say, well, look, we like where we grew up, right? We like the city, but if you can't afford it, it really makes you have to make some difficult decisions. And, and not to say, not to throw shadow on any other cities, but, I think, this is, like you said, a desirable, just, geographically area to live in. And so I think that that's where we have to do a better job in making sure that at least we provide that option, that reasonable option for people to say, we may have to pay a little bit more, but not something that's like just extraordinarily high, where it's unreasonable. And you're now creating dangerous conditions because you have people doubling and tripling up in a unit and, causing all these issues. And that leads to public health issues as well, not just, public safety or parking issues, but now you're getting into like life-threatening conditions, right? Because especially with this pandemic, if you have a household that has 10, 12 people in it, only one person, it only takes one person to come back to that household. They're sick. They're contagious. They get everybody else. And there was this horrible story. I know, a few weeks back, I think that the Times or the Register covered, but the entire household, got infected, and it was about 9 people. And the father, head of the household, obviously the most elder, passed away. So those stories are really graphic, but they let us know what the conditions are. And, we're seeing that with this pandemic, that the 4 highest zip codes in the county are here in Santa Ana that have the highest levels of COVID cases. So Santa Ana and West Anaheim, they've got 4 zip codes that are very highly impacted. But if you look at those areas, they are the immigrant, working class, low income families, right, that are out there that they can't work from home. They don't have luxury. They don't qualify for, CARES Act money or unemployment, or they don't have a safety net. They're living month to month, right? And so they have to be out there. They have to be working in hospitals, still stocking shelves in grocery stores, still working in the back half of the restaurant, right, in the kitchen. And, they're they're keeping this economy going, but they're the ones who are like getting themselves exposed. And
Yeah.
once they're exposed, they go back, and it just becomes like a time bomb. Right?
Yeah. And it's tough. I hope the pandemic has been rough for a lot of people, a lot of families, and it's affected so many people across the world. But I hope we rethink a lot of things. And I've noticed I've had a lot more conversations just with friends or colleagues or coworkers about things like this, whether it's, housing, like education. I work with the youth in Garden Grove. I'm a high school football coach, but I've also worked with middle schools and after school programs the past few years. And so I just, I hope we just rethink these things and hopefully come out better out of this pandemic, whether it's through education, housing, public safety, like all kinds of different things. I just really hope we rethink a lot of things, get the ball rolling, and just actually try to make some change instead of trying to just, slap some Band-Aids and painkillers over things things that really need to be fixed in the deep root of problems,
So are you guys going to have a season this year?
So the plan is, right now we're in phase 2, which means we can condition with the kids, just do push-ups, no footballs in sight. Kids are 6 feet apart. But the plan is for our first game to be New Year's Eve. So the whole season is supposed to go on in January and February in the winter. But we'll see how that goes. We haven't had any hiccups yet, but it's going to be kind of crazy.
Yeah, I know. Well, you know what? My son's a senior at Godinez, and
Okay.
And he's a basketball player. So this is really going to be his last. Hopefully, if they're able to, and it looks like they're going to push that season out to maybe later in the spring.
Yeah.
Look, I told him you're not going to get recruited by the NBA, man. So this is it. this is the end of the cycle of organized ball. At least for school. So he was looking forward to that, and I'm hoping we get there. We're doing better. I think there's been an effort to make sure that we saturate our neighborhoods with like mobile testing services, resources. That's helped blunt the effort, and I think people are starting to realize, this is 6 months into this, this is a real thing. Yeah, you should wear your masks, but it's really it's really difficult to hear people that still don't get it, right?
Yeah.
And I think it comes straight from the top, right? When that's messaged like, hey, this isn't a big thing, it's going to go away, and the communities that's hurting the most is ours. I mean, so we're like super front end of this. I mean, our numbers of positivity rates are like, twice, 3 times, what other communities are, and our mortality rates, same thing. So we really are. I mean, when we look back on this later and we see which communities were the most impacted and the most hurt, it's going to be ours.
Yeah.
It'll be, and it's going to be a painful thing to see like, hey, did we really have to sacrifice all these lives? Did we really? Because it's not just, the mortality, but businesses in Santa Ana are going to fail as a result of this. I mean, we're going to have tons of, businesses that, fail. There's going to be people out of work, people living, in precarious situations. So there's going to be a lot of fallout, and questions will be asked like, what the hell happened? Why did we do? How do we not see this coming? Right.
Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest thing too, especially at the higher level, I just felt like things became so like, okay, you're either one side or the other. And if you support so-and-so, then you're automatically racist. You're automatically bad. Like there's no cross. You can't support one thing that's contradictory with another stance. So I just felt like it just turned very political with the whole mask and like believing in COVID. And, it's even the country, look at the country as a whole, like the South is already reopening high schools and sports are continuing as normal. The Midwest is very different. Texas is different. The Northeast is very different, still locked down, kind of like the West Coast is. But it's crazy to see just like in all levels of that, whether it's high school sports, college sports, and just other areas of the government. I think Florida just announced the other day that they opened up like completely, like they're not even in any phases. They're just completely reopening up. But they've had the most deaths as a state, and it's kind of like, why, it's weird to see the disconnect. We're supposed to be United States, but we're very disconnected right now.
Yeah, but even in our county, man, I mean, if you think about it, the county has done a horrible job, and they're the agency that's vested with this responsibility and these rights to take care of health, public health, and social services. So they receive millions of dollars, and they've received millions of dollars throughout this thing early on, months back, and they never spent it where they knew the problem was going to be. So that to me is like, we look at how ridiculous, Florida is and some of these other places, but man, our county has been completely incompetent. They've been, bordering on criminal, right? When you have monies that you could have spent months back and invested into making sure that people get tested, people have the resources, and people are informed, they sat on their hands, right? And I think really we're listening to folks in South County who are like opposed to this and, saying that masks aren't important and, hey, don't take away my liberties and that type of thing. The reason why, it's so difficult for us, and I think so difficult for me, is that our people were the ones who are being sacrificed. Like,
Right.
yeah, that ignorance or that lack of attention, that lack of care, had real consequences. And so, we don't have to go far, man. As much as we can ridicule, some states like Florida, our county has been
Yeah.
just belligerent to us. I mean, they've been so harsh that it's painful. And that's why, I'm hoping that Santa Ana does need, like Long Beach and Pasadena, they have their own public health directors, right, and public health departments, because we are a unique enough city and a large enough city that our needs are very different from South County and North County. I mean, we have, again, a population that, they get their health care by going to the emergency room. I mean, that's crazy, right? And we have a lot of people who are underinsured or uninsured, and that's not the same experience that others in outside of Santa Ana have. So I think we need to have some department or some director that will help devise more wellness efforts, more ways to create just safety, public health safety for our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was an interesting thing too. When I went away to Sacramento State for college, when you say you're from Orange County, people have a certain perception, right, of South County and the different TV shows that they've had. But I felt like growing up in Santa Ana and a little bit of Orange too, and then like working in Garden Grove and then Anaheim not too far, then even Stanton and smaller cities like that. I mean, those like 5-6 cities are very different from like Yorba Lindas and Santa Margaritas and San Clemente's and all those different cities. And it's a completely different lifestyle. They're like, oh, you must live so good. And it's like, nah, like I had to ride my bike to school and like, I was helping out my parents at a young age and all that kind of stuff. It's a very different livelihood that's portrayed on the television and screens,
Yeah, you're right. I think anybody who, outside of here, who hasn't visited Santa Ana, they're like, oh, well, you're in Orange County. I mean, you guys are an affluent community. You guys, I think, what's that show, The Real Housewives of Orange County? I think that really did us in, man. I mean, on top of everything else. But, and also, we have to remember, Orange County for years was the sort of the stronghold for the Republican Party. I mean, this was where the Republican Party really, provided resources and, money. So a lot of the money came from here to fund things, that were, kind of hostile to communities like ours. But I think, yeah, you're right. I think now we're starting to realize that, Santa Ana is very demographically similar to places like East LA, and we have those same challenges that those communities have. And we're now starting to say, we have almost two societies in Orange County. We have, our experience in Santa Ana and the experience, like you said, South County and other areas. And look, and that's fine. I think that there's nothing that we have to be ashamed of. I think if anything, we embrace it and we say, hey, these are things that we celebrate: diversity, difference in culture, different languages. Those are all positives. The history that we have here. But we also have to realize our needs are different. Right. And our, how we allocate our resources should be different than neighboring cities who don't have our challenges. Mm-hmm. If we understand ours, we can then make better decisions on how we provide services to people. And I just think our needs are very different from the needs of like the cities that, we were talking about. And that's why an agency like the county can't do that well, because they don't understand, I think, our needs well. And if they do, it's even worse to think that they're not addressing them.
Mm-hmm. So I do want to backtrack a little bit. You first ran for city council in 2007. What encouraged you to kind of go that political route and pursue a career in that?
Yeah, man. Who knew? I don't know what I was thinking. But actually, I was appointed. So I didn't run the first time. So there was an opening on the city council because the council member there had won an assembly race. So they left half a term left on their council term. So we went through an interview process and the council got to appoint somebody. So I filled out that term. And the first time I actually ran for office was in 2008. Okay. And so, I mean, more than anything, the reason I did it was because I think for a lot of us that left and came back, I always felt like, hey, I have this obligation or this, maybe a debt that I wanted to repay. Like what I always saw is people from Santa Ana who would go on and be successful, they'd leave and never come back, right? So you had this human capital, escape, right? Or this, this loss of human capital where, a lot of the folks who were prepared to help went to go help other communities, right? And I thought if I ever make it back here, I'm going to try to do something. And so I always thought public policy, the legislative route was the right way to go because we could design good public policy that will help our communities. And so, just things that I saw as a kid that when my parents would go, it's not like we would go often, but if we had to go to the city or city hall for whatever reason, I remember them being treated really harshly, right? Because they didn't speak English well. So little things like, one of the first things we did was introduce translation equipment and just, interpreters that if somebody came, didn't understand, hey, you put on the gear, somebody translates it for you, at least you feel part of your community. And things like, other things that I saw that just weren't working well, I just thought, let me see if I can lend my talents to this. And so that kind of put a bug in me. And, and I ran for student senate actually in college. So I was a student senator at Berkeley. And so my wife ran my campaign. So yeah, I think it's all her fault, man. I don't blame her, because she was able to find a path for us to win. And so when we came here, she's been helping me with my campaigns, and we just got involved. And I think there needed to be a different voice because I think the city had been going down the same thing of let's just do the same thing over and over again. But I'm really hopeful, man, that look, your generation now, I see a lot of people who are running for office, and I know it's disillusioning sometimes when you see politics, especially the ugly stuff at the national level, right? People say, I don't want anything to do with that. That is horrible. But it really is a noble thing to do. And I've always felt that way. Like, hey, you're giving of yourself to help your community and people that you care about. And I think it really is a noble profession when it's done well. When it's abused or when people do it for the wrong reasons, it is really bad and can be distorted. But when you're doing it for for righteous reasons, I think it's a really awesome thing to do. And I feel privileged and honored that I had the opportunity to do it. Like, I figure if I walk away and things don't work out for me, I'm going to be great. I have, my law practice, I have my kids, I have family. And I've been away from them a lot just doing this, but I just think I don't want this next generation to say, look, I don't want to get involved, man. That is too ugly. That is too messy, because there are ugly stories, but we need good leadership. We really do, because this is going to be handed off to somebody, and who takes those reins is going to make a difference. But yeah, like I said, I'm hopeful, and I feel optimistic because I see a lot of good people, a lot of good young people saying, I want to be part of this. I want to help define what we do in the next coming years, and I want to help define what Santa Ana is.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, there's that great quote, it's like you have to become the change you want to see. So if you're tired of, whether it's at a local level or at a national level, you're not tired of people that are put in power of doing correct things for your communities. And, eventually it takes, it may take some like sacrifice in your own personal life and your own personal goals, but to do something like that and get you in office. And I just think, at the end of the day too, like the government, what does the Constitution say, is like, it's a government made by the people for the people. And I think I misquoted that, but what I'm saying? It's for the people and made by the people. Right. So it's the whole aspect of, okay, well, who is the people? Like, we are, like, people like us and these communities, whether it doesn't matter our skin tone, I was born here, and there's other people who look very different than me that were also born here too. And they have opportunities to run for different local offices and eventually maybe national offices one day. Right.
No, but I mean, like I said, what I've been heartened by is I've never seen the number of people, want to speak at a council meeting, and young, I mean, like literally hundreds, right? Yeah. I've never seen that before. And we were talking about things like, the budget, the police department, housing, and really, really articulate voices. So, people talking about policy, people talking about like, decisions and options and balancing interests. And so I like I said, once I heard that, and, I've been trying to enjoy this because I figure this could be my swan song. So I want to appreciate, all this, because I feel like hopefully there's been some inspiration also given to, to people who are younger to say, you know what, yeah, this is on me, because for the longest time, sort of politics here wrote off the youth. Like they said, they'll never show up. They don't vote. They come and, kind of get involved every once in a while, and then they kind of go away. But I think it's different this time. I really do. And I think, there's been some inspiration that is triggered, like this interest, like, hey, this is my responsibility. And like you said, if you want to be critical, if you want to say, hey, this isn't right, well, you put yourself in that position, or put others in that position that you believe in. And I think that if we do exercise that, I mean, we could define our path really, really easily.
Mm-hmm. So going back to your election and your campaign this year, what are some of the tougher obstacles of running an election and running a campaign during a quarantine year and during this pandemic?
Oh man, it's tough, man, because before, you could have events, you could have receptions, and, and you could, get to know people and just, sit and talk. Right now, it's scary even going to somebody's door, right? Because you don't want to offend anybody, and so you can't have that human exchange. And, Zoom and these sort of virtual exchanges only go so far, and you're reaching a real limited group of people. So it really is challenging, just messaging, what you're trying to introduce. And so I think it's teaching all of us, but we're all at the same sort of disadvantage, I guess, on that. But it really does, I think, make it difficult for the average voter or for the average resident to say, I don't know what this person is promoting, and what their policy principles are, what their platform is about. So we're trying to make it as easy and, create a very user-friendly website. We're trying to do a lot of social media, which is funny. The last time I ran in 2016, that was the last cycle I ran in. I used zero social media. Wow. I mean, it was crazy, right? I mean, to go from like 2016 to now we're like, heavy social media. Yeah. And you never had to use it before. Before it was all like, hey, we'll send some pieces of mail. We'll do a little bit of walking, knocking on doors, and that was it. But now, really, this, these platforms and your generation really gets its information not from the mail, not from the newspaper or anything. You get it from social media, right? And you get it from sources that you feel there's some trust, right? But it is a whole different world. So I just can't see how anybody could do things the traditional way anymore, the conventional way. That's gone. I mean, that model is over. So it has been learning for me, because I'm an old dog, right? I mean, I learned different, our strategies were totally different. We've had to pivot and change, and, and it's been interesting, because, now we're doing videos, now we're doing Zoom calls, we're doing, Facebook Live things. But it's been great because we've had to just adjust to the circumstances. But I don't think that's one thing about this pandemic and about this time, we'll never go back to what it was like before, right? Where it was, knocking on doors and, mailing stuff. I think if anything, the social media is probably going to push a lot of that aside, and it's going to be the dominant way we message. And we saw it done well when Obama ran. I mean, he was a master at it, right? Yeah. And I think Trump did the same thing for his base, right? Yeah. I mean, they used it masterfully as well. For us at the local level, I think now we're starting to realize the power of that, and really, I mean, where people find their information, that really is the key.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking from experience, just because I know I turned 18 in 2012, and so I got to vote for that Obama Mitt Romney election, and basically, I felt like as a young person that I wasn't properly educated on the importance of voting local. I voted for the president, but I think I'm pretty sure I left the rest of my ballot blank because I didn't know anything about who was running for these positions in city council and stuff. But how do you, I guess, as far as like reaching out to younger people who are just fresh out of high school in this younger demographic, the importance of voting, not so much on the presidential election, because that's something that we all talk about, but so much on the local level for city council, mayor, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that's you know, sort of that's our challenge, right? And because people, as much as you want, as much as I'll speak for myself, I want to change at the top, and it's super important that we get involved for the presidential election. Look, who represents you at the local level is 100 times more important. And I got to tell you, because you can have, we were living under a really, and we're living under a really difficult, challenging administration that is very hostile to communities like Santa Ana. And I can tell you that our funding's been compromised because of the positions that they've taken towards communities like ours. So those folks that you put in office locally are the ones who are going to be fighting for your interests, right? Who are going to be making those compelling cases, and who are going to be saying, we need more resources, we need this, these are our policy, opinions and our views. And so I think that, we don't always give that same level of focus and attention to people who are going to be your council members, who are going to be your mayor, your school board members, people who are going to affect your life directly. Like school board members, they affect you because they change policies on how your kids are going to be taught. A president doesn't do that, right? A state legislator doesn't do that. Your school board members is going to say, like they recently did, and I applaud, we want ethnic studies to be a requirement, for everybody who graduates. And super important decision. That's not going to be made, at the federal level, those things. So your local representatives really help you. Again, Santa Ana is a sanctuary city. That was a local decision because we have so many undocumented immigrant families here that we're protecting their rights to confidentiality. So those are local decisions. How we police ourselves, that's not a federal decision. That's a local question. How much money do we invest in our local libraries? Do we invest in our, programs for youth? How do we do our housing policy? So I think those really, like if you ask somebody, what's most important to you? You want to be safe. You want to be able to, drive on a smooth road. You don't want potholes and to mess up your shocks and your car. Those are local decisions. So if you think about it, you should know who your local people are, more importantly than the people that, who don't touch your lives every day. So we touch your lives every day. So I think trying to get that instilled in people is tough, man, because it's counterintuitive. You think, hey, the election's all about the president. Well, not really. The down ballot issues, those propositions and those people you're voting for, 100 times more important to your daily life.
Mm-hmm. So speaking as your time as a city council member, I was reading up on some of the stuff that you were able to get accomplished and whatnot. And I wanted to ask you, from your own perspective, out of all the things that you've accomplished, was there anything that really kind of stood out above from the rest that you were just, thought back and like, wow, I was really able to accomplish that big thing that will be a lasting impact?
Yeah. I think one of the legacy issues, I think that'll be really important to me when I do kind of go off into the sunset will be, this deportation fund that started as a really small concept where we just saw a lot of our families being separated, a lot of our people being separated from their families, right? They, parents wouldn't come home to their children, and they were being taken away and swept up. And myself as a lawyer realized that when you go to those deportation hearings and you're by yourself or you're accompanied by your attorney, totally different result. It's almost, night and day. If you go in unrepresented, the possibility of you being deported is almost certainty. If you go in with an attorney that's going to represent you, your chances go to 70% that you're going to be able to have an argument to make before the court so you can stay. So we funded this thing called it was called the Universal Legal Defense Fund back then, but it basically paid for an attorney to accompany you to your hearing, which the Constitution says you do in criminal cases, but in immigration cases, that's not the case. So we did this, and we got a matching fund from a federal nonprofit that gave us $100,000. We did 60, and since then we've been doing 200,000 towards this program each year. it's a big accomplishment to me because I think that we've been able to keep people and families together.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why that's important is once you separate families, that family struggles, that neighborhood starts struggling, and our community struggles, right? So people don't realize it's like a ripple effect. You disrupt this household, it disrupts the neighborhood, it disrupts your community. And the more you keep people intact, you make them feel like, hey, you're safe, go to work, follow the rules, you'll be all right. But that is one sort of long-lasting effort. I've worked on affordable housing stuff. I've worked on the sanctuary city stuff. I've worked on things like, one of the things when we came out of the recession, I really advocated for a reserve policy. So if we ever get in a place like we are now, another natural disaster and another national emergency, we'll have money in the bank like all of us should have. We didn't have that before I came on the council.
Wow.
Myself, as a bankruptcy attorney, I said, no, we're going to keep money in there no matter what, because I know the rainy day will come. And who knew? Sorry about that. Who knew that, I was going to be in my first year as a councilman dealing with like a global recession, right, in 2008. And then now, as I'm leaving, we're dealing with a global pandemic. But look, I feel proud of the decisions that I've made because I think that we got ourselves through the recession. I think with good decision-making, intelligent, thoughtful decisions, we'll get ourselves through this pandemic as well. So that's where I feel confident.
Mm-hmm. So at the time of this recording, election day is less than 40 days away. But what are some of the things you're doing to ramp up your campaign and to just spread your message to the local people of Santa Ana?
Right now, I'm just trying to be as visible as possible. What I do a lot, and I'm actually going to be doing right after I get off this call, is going to a food distribution event. So, we don't realize how many families are food deprived, right? And I'm really grateful that we have organizations like organization called Power of One Foundation. The other is the United Across Border Foundations. What they do is they gather food items and they provide them to the community, right? And so that to me is like a basic need that we need to address. What I've been doing there is just trying to make sure families are fed. What I'm trying to do personally for the campaign is just make myself as visible on social media, on platforms like yours and others, to be able to explain what it is that I stand for, what my vision is, right? And I think that's important for people to evaluate, because I think there's 6 of us in this race. This is the first time in 26 years there will be a new mayor, right? So that mayor is termed out. That's been here. Yeah, man, probably older than you are, or what?
I'm 26, so just the same age.
Yeah, man, you've never had a mayor in Santa Ana other than the one that you have now. That'll change. So we put term limits. That's another accomplishment that I'm proud of. So in 2012 we put term limits on the mayor's seat. So they would have a reasonable time, and it's 8 years now, the term. Look, if you can't accomplish what you need to do in 8 years, there's something wrong with you, not something wrong with the office, right? So I'm just trying to make myself as available as I can, safely, right? Because we can't do it anymore in person, but it's just trying to push the message out now through social media. We are going to be mailing some stuff out. We are going to be on radio, Spanish language and Vietnamese radio. But it's just trying to make sure people know who we are and what we stand for and how we stand out from the other candidates.
Nice. Outside of the election, what are some other goals that you do have for the year 2020 that you'd like to accomplish?
Oh man, I just want 2020 to end, man. It is, every time I think it can't get worse, something else happens, right? So, it's funny that night that Justice Ginsburg passed away. So I just looked at my wife and I said, this year just gets darker and darker. Right. And we were big, supporters of hers. And, I have a daughter who's 15 years old, and we took her to go see, Notorious RBG, the movie and everything. And because to us, she really represented what we think was important for, raising a daughter and having those, seeing that story. So it's going to be probably for us, getting through this year. I'm a big basketball fan, so it didn't start well when Kobe passed away, and I didn't do shit.
Right.
It was just all downhill from there.
Yeah.
Right?
I still remember thinking, because I got the phone call from my cousin, and because I was in like Lake Arrowhead, so I wasn't really getting good reception. I couldn't check like online, and yeah, I just thought like, oh, this is gonna be the biggest news of the year. Like nothing's gonna top this Kobe pass. Like what? Like, and sure enough, that blew out of the water like a month later.
Yeah, just crazy. So yeah, to the extent that we can survive this year, get through it. I mean, hopefully, outside the election, it's just trying to get back to the family a little bit more, because I know I've been spending a lot of time on the campaign. Because it's funny with Zoom calls and everything else. Even though you don't have to be out, this can be almost more stressful on you, because there is no commute time. Like you're on one call after another, and you're just constantly there. And days blend into one another, hours blend into them. And it's not like having your sort of typical routine where, hey, it's Monday through Friday, it's after 5 o'clock. Okay, you're done. This just goes. So, so it'll be just trying to regroup with them. I'm gonna go see if I can visit my son back east. And so I haven't seen him in a while, so I'm missing him. So that's probably going to be a priority one. That's
cool. Where is he going to school at over in back east?
He's at Northeastern.
Okay, very cool.
He's in Boston, man. He loves Boston. I don't know how that's that's about as far away as he could get from us. So I don't know if that was a message to us, but he likes it back there, man.
It's all right. Sometimes kids, at least from my experience, sometimes kids just want to get away for a little bit, and then we come back home and realize how much we missed. So that at least from my experience and standpoint.
Well, we're crossing our fingers, man. I don't know, because he's enjoying it. He likes, and Boston's a great city, so it's easy to get around in and everything, but he really enjoys that. But like you said, I think when you're in college, you just enjoy the experience of learning and being exposed to different things and other people's experiences, other students from all over the world. And so I think he's enjoying that. But yeah, I'll definitely need some time just to hang back with family for a little bit and just, get back to normalcy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we wrap things up, I do like to ask some like kind of I call them quick hitters, but they're not really quick. They're just more to make you think outside the box. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, if you could talk to any person, dead or alive in history, who would you want to talk to the most?
I'd like to. I read a book on him, and Alexander Hamilton really piqued my interest with the play and everything else, because he helped. Once I started, when I read his biography, I realized he helped draft the framework, and he was the architect of our system of government. And ask him, what he was thinking, because it really was meant to keep the masses at bay and to protect sort of the ruling class, because it was sort of, it was defined after the English, and their system of government. So yeah, I mean, so
okay.
Alexander Hamilton.
All right, nice. If you could have any kind of toppings on a pizza, what would you like?
Oh man, I always go with pepperoni, sausage, and mushrooms.
Okay.
Those are it.
Nice.
Keep it simple.
Okay. All right. Nothing wrong with that. Let's say, metaphoric or hypothetically, you're stranded on a tropical island, but food and water are provided. What are 3 things that you'd like to bring to help pass the time?
Music, a chessboard, and something to draw with, something to create art with.
Okay, nice. Do you have any particular favorite artists, bands, or groups that music-wise?
Yeah, mine's a spectrum. So I like, people from the spectrum of Maná to Santana.
Okay.
Those are my spectrums.
Okay, very cool. And last question: if you could give any advice to your younger self, what would it be?
To feel more confident about yourself. To feel more confident and just know that things are going to be okay.
Awesome. Well, before you go ahead and go, be sure to plug wherever where we can find you on social media, your website, and anything else that you'd like to promote.
All right. Well, look, whoever wants to learn a little bit more about me, we've got everything up on our website. It's www.sarmientoformayor.com. Sarmientoformayor.com. And, hopefully if the questions aren't answered there's a link to be able to communicate with us through email and through phone. And we're happy to answer any questions. But I appreciate you, man. Thank you for inviting me and telling my story. And look, I'm real proud of what you're doing. I know, your aunt, your mom, and you come from a great family. And it's just great to know that your generation is stepping up and doing a lot of the stuff maybe that we weren't able to get to at your age. But like I said, I feel optimistic, man, about this.
Awesome. Thank you very much.